on individual issues like funding for public education, funding to deal with poverty, curtailing the military budget, taxing the wealthy. Poll after poll since the Truman era shows that Americans have been looking for a change. What has happened in the last 3 to 5 decades is that there has been, for a combination of various reasons, a real decimation of the activist layer, a real systematic attack against the labor movement, going on for decades, that has pushed us on the back foot. But that doesn't mean people are ideologically shifted that way. People are actually ideologically shifting leftward. And in fact, what is happening now, and look at the increasing bizarreness of the phenomenon of the presidential primaries. Now that Hillary looks like the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, you can see Trump starting to pose as if he is to the left of Hillary. He has railed against trade deals, and we know it is absolutely cynical and disingenuous on his part, but can anybody fact check him if he says that Clinton was responsible, or part of the establishment that was responsible for NAFTA? We cannot, because that's the truth. The Clinton establishment has been one of the purveyors, part of the purveyors of these trade deals. Can anybody fact check anyone pointing out that Hillary Clinton stood on the board of Walmart for 6 years? How can somebody who positioned herself as an advocate for a purveyor of low wages for women claim to be representing the interests of working class women? And so I think that it's a little bit of a circular logic we're dealing with when people tell us that, well, we agree, we all supported Bernie, we all did the right thing, but now it's time for unity. In order to defeat Trump, we all have to, however distasteful it might be, get behind Hillary because that's what needs to be done. But that's why I want to point out the circular logic. The people who are supporting Trump, the majority of them are supporting him because they're angry at the establishment, of which Clinton is the very epitome. So it makes no sense to say that if you want to peel away votes from Trump, you're going to present as an alternative the very thing that makes people go towards Trump. That makes no sense. But it is even more important. I'm laying it out in terms of the electoral parameters of this year, but it is much deeper than that, and it is important for an analysis to go beyond that. Trump as a phenomenon did not arise out of a political vacuum. Trump is the incarnation, which is a result of a rightward shift by the establishment parties, both Democratic and Republican parties, over the last many decades. Republicans have moved rightward, the Democrats have moved rightward, and if there was ever any room for working class politics in the Democratic Party, and I'm not making that claim, but if there ever was any space, that space has completely been squeezed out. I think a lot of people who are advocating for a vote for Hillary are agreeing with that, and yet are going to argue that we need to somehow vote for Hillary. And I think that the other thing that we need to deal with is the question of the relationship between what should our position be this year and the question of building mass movements. We will often hear people saying, well, this is why I stay away from electoral politics, that's why we just need to keep building our movements. Every time that there's a presidential election year, it derails our movement. And that is true, it does derail our movement. But by sticking our head in the sand and saying we're not going to take a position on Trump versus Hillary, Trump versus Clinton, because we just need to keep building our movements, sort of misses the point that in order to actually build our mass movement, whether it is to win $15 an hour at the national level, whether it is for single-payer healthcare, funding for public education, as Bernie says, taxing Wall Street speculation to make public universities free. You pick any item, any demand from Bernie's platform, in order to win any of them, it would be an almighty battle for mass movements to win any of those reforms. But in that battle, we will be cutting off an arm and a leg of that movement if we said that we are not going to explicitly challenge the domination of the Democratic Party and their systematic betrayal of our movements decade after decade. And I want to give you a concrete example. In our fight for 15 in Seattle, I was elected before, we won 15 6 months after I was elected, and during our campaign in 2013, we raised prominently the banner of $15 an hour. When we ran throughout that campaign, not a single politician came forward in support of $15 an hour.
No,
and as Philip said, there is no Republican Party to speak of in Seattle. It's just the Democrats. If there are any systematic problems in Seattle, they fall at the doorstep of the Democratic Party that has ruled the city, just like the Democratic Party has ruled Chicago. And you can see what's happened with the teachers' union, with housing, with the question of police brutality towards the black community. So when we ran our campaign, we prominently talked about $15 an hour. Not a single corporate politician stepped in and promoted it. But when we won our campaign and we were coming close to winning, we had the mayoral candidate who ultimately became the mayor supporting 15, in a formal way. But we need to make a distinction between Democratic politicians who will follow movements, recognize that they need to express support of it in order to win an election, make a distinction between that and our own candidates who will fight, who will fight boldly for those demands, run campaigns on that basis, win or lose. And I think that's extremely important. And what our experience shows was that everything that we said during our campaign, far from being a barrier to winning, was precisely the reason we won. That we called ourselves an open socialist, that we ran in defiance of the Democratic Party establishment, that we called for $15 an hour and taxing the rich. That was precisely that what that allowed us to win the campaign. And what happened after that, right after I was elected, was that the mayor called a committee of big business and labor and asked me to be a part of that, expecting that I would be marginalized, and I would say I would be a purist, and I agree with Charles. We should not have a purist mentality. What the mayor thought was that we would refuse to participate in this committee because we would refuse to be part of an establishment, organization essentially. What we did was we publicly accepted that invitation, but we said that my hands will not be tied in any way to the establishment by membership in this committee, and that I will be on this committee as a shop steward for the workers of Seattle. And in order to actually have 115, it was essential that we had our own position on the Seattle City Council, and something that we did after we won our election through Socialist Alternative, I launched the 15 Now campaign, the grassroots campaign, that filed a ballot initiative that was ultimately the threat, that was the only reason big business finally capitulated to our demands, finally condescended to say, what, if we don't pass this, we have something bigger waiting for us in the wings. We better do this now. So it was an example of wringing out concessions from the establishment, but I include running our own independent candidates as an essential component of this, because if we hadn't had our seat at that table, I am not clear that we would have won 15 at all. It is now the narrative of the political establishment is that we brought everyone together and we worked out a grand compromise. But that is not what happened behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, it was, as I said, an almighty battle against big business, but we are only able to conduct that battle, it's not just a question of integrity, in your mind. It's a question of what makes you effective. What was the reason that made me effective in fighting against big business? It was that I was independent of big business because, as was said before, I did not take a penny from big business. But that's not enough. You also have to be independent from the Democratic Party establishment, because the Democratic Party establishment is tied to big business. So as long as you are tied to the Democratic Party establishment, big business gets to influence your ability to fight for workers. So my sisters and brothers, this is not about good intentions or running good candidates. It's about having good intentions and putting them to the most effective use. And it is not effective to have good intentions if you are going to be beholden to a party that is fundamentally antagonistic to our interests. There are other examples that show the need for independent politics as well. I mean, just very briefly, I'll recount to you. If you look at why Canada was able to win its single-payer healthcare system, it was precisely because the labor movements and mass movements there fought for independent left parties. And it was the development of independent politics in that manner that established single-payer healthcare in one province and then put so much pressure on the establishment parties to bring forward single-payer healthcare nationally. So even if we are talking about, I would not advocate this because I'm a socialist and I'm fighting for systemic change away from capitalism. But even if our calculation was simply, what is the best way to win the reforms that we are wanting to win? I would say not only the best way, but really the only way of winning any of these reforms is to take that first step of breaking from the Democratic Party. We cannot talk about running good candidates in the abstract unless we build an independent party for ourselves. And I know that there are ideas, that were brought forward, legitimate questions. Shouldn't we change the Democratic Party rules? Aren't people waking up? Aren't people understanding because of Bernie's run that the Democratic Party doesn't, at this moment is not set up for us, we need to do something? I mean, yeah, that's a fair question to ask. But my response to the idea of changing the ground rules in the Democratic Party is, one, look how they are fighting tooth and nail against their own party members who are supporting Bernie Sanders. So let's not kid ourselves that it is somehow going to be a fair and square debate that we will win because the majority of the base supports this kind of change. It is not going to be like that. But a more fundamental point I would make is why? Why at a historic moment when millions, tens of millions of Americans are looking for an independent agenda away from corporate parties, should we be lagging behind the grain of history? We should be looking ahead and recognizing that it is not that previous period anymore. This is the post-Occupy movement period. This is the period when people all across the world are looking for new avenues of fight back. Why? Why should we sacrifice this enormous energy and momentum towards resurrecting failed strategies? And I want to say, people will also bring up other questions. Again, legitimate questions people are grappling with. Well, you can't win as an independent. And of course, our first response is, we won in Seattle. And again, legitimately, people could say, well, you're not going to win every single time. And of course, we would never claim that we would win every single time. There is no such thing. I mean, I can't have a crystal ball and say every time we run a socialist alternative candidate, we would win. We didn't win our first campaign in 2012 when we ran for the state house. But here's the point. As long as we try to run within the Democratic Party, we might win candidates, but that's not but winning candidates is not the question. Can we win social change by running Democrats is the question. And what we have seen again and again is that there are good candidates, and I agree with Charles, there are good people everywhere. The problem with good people running in a bad party is that you get bad outcomes despite good people. And you can see the new polls that are indicating what moment of history we are in. A new poll just came out, I think 3 days ago, which said that 65% of likely voters in America are open to a candidate other than Clinton and Trump. But here's the real thing. 91% of those who are under the age of 28 say that they would like an independent alternative to Clinton and Trump. Those are the millions of young people that our organizations have to be speaking to, because that is the generation of activists that is going to come to the fore in the next few years. And what we do this year is not detached from the question of what we do the next few years. And I would ask a very simple question as far as not just this year. There may be people who say, I won't vote for Hillary this year, but I still think that the Democratic Party is okay, we'll run good candidates in the Democratic Party all over. I would say this: if defeating Trump's agenda was the primary priority of the Democratic Party, then why didn't they do everything in their power to pick the candidate who, by all accounts, by every poll, looks set to deliver a thumping defeat to Trump if he were to be the Democratic Party nominee? Why is it that they have chosen the weakest possible representative in order to counter Trump? And look at the political circus we are in this year, right? We have the least popular presidential candidate running from a major party in the last 10 presidential cycles, running against the second least popular presidential candidate in the last 10 presidential cycles. That speaks to the real polarization in society. The real polarization in American society is not between a bunch of left-wing people, working people, and a bunch of right-wing, left working people. The polarization is between the vast ocean of working people who feel alienated from politics and from every social agenda, and the elite who are completely out of touch. And those elite, those parties deserve to crumble. Why should we be spending our movement's energy in trying to prop them up when they have failed us so systematically? And ultimately, we need organizations. We wouldn't have won. I know everybody wants to talk about our victories in Seattle as Kshama Sawant did something great. Please know that nothing we did was any single person's effort. But not just that. No campaign is a single person's effort. But unlike the corporate political parties where candidates run mostly, despite some with good intentions, to promote their own personal political careers, Socialist Alternative, the way we run our campaigns, offers a model for what we believe that independent party for 99% should be doing, which is having an actual say for every person who carries a membership card of that party, having a say in what the platform of the campaign should be, having a say on who the candidate should be, and ensuring that everything about political campaigns is tied to the movements we are fighting for and is absolutely in service of the working class and not in service of personal careers. And we would not have been able to do what we did had we not had a cohesive organization. And that's the kind of vision we have to have in mind if we are to actually challenge the Democratic Party. Not just have meetings where we say we don't want to challenge, but actually challenge. Like having meetings like this could be a chapter of the new independent party for the 99%, but we have to start working towards this. And I thought Micah, I need to finish soon, but I just wanted to add a few things. I thought Micah brought very important points up about the labor movement, and he said that the labor movement, the labor bureaucracy likes to back winning candidates, and there is of course truth to that. When we ran in 2013, the largest unions, including SEIU in Seattle, said that they didn't see a path to victory. I'm actually quoting them, but we did win. And that's true. But there is much more to it than that. There's much more to explain what the labor bureaucracy has been doing for decades. It's their ties to the Democratic Party that paralyze the labor movement. It is not simply that they want to win. And we should absolutely fight for structural reforms within the labor movement. We need to have democratic elections, and I really agree with every single point that Micah talked about in terms of the UFT. I'm a rank and file member of the AFT in Seattle, and I know that there is widespread anger among the rank and file about the endorsement of Clinton without any due process, really. We weren't asked for a vote. But this is what I would say. We cannot make this kind of change within the labor movement, again, by good intentions alone. That fight for democracy within the labor movement is ultimately tied to a fight for an independent party politically, because the labor bureaucracy that stymies democracy within the labor movement is also the labor bureaucracy that is tied to the Democratic Party and prevents independent politics from rising up. So I would say that we should absolutely be fighting within the labor movement, but we need for that, in order for that to be successful, to be tied to the larger question of independent politics.